It's about Donald Trump's victory on Election Day. I'm putting some of the blame on the politically correct crowd because they're pushing too far in favor of queers. Now, it's one thing to protest when bullies commit unprovoked violence against queers. See, they have no right to commit that unprovoked violence, and in the government-run indoctrination centers, the queers are compelled by law to attend the sessions, and the bullies are doing this. The schools were remiss about protecting the queers, even to the point where teachers and administrators might even say to the queers, well, you made that choice and these are the consequences. Well, that had to stop. The best way to put a stop to that, of course, is to discontinue the government violence, the use of gun-toting goons in bulletproof vests to intimidate people into paying school taxes, and the use of gun-toting goons in bulletproof vests to intimidate children into attending the sessions of government-run indoctrination centers. See, it's one thing to put a stop to that unprovoked violence. It's quite a different thing to require a commercial wedding photographer, such as in the case in New Mexico, where a couple of queers were going to get so-called married, and they demanded that she perform at the so-called wedding ceremony, and she refused to do so, and the courts ruled that she was acting illegally, discrimination against the queers. Now, in a free country, you wouldn't have landlords being forced to rent to queers or businesses forced to hire queers and then call it tenancy and employment at will. In a free country, the queers could run businesses, and they might not want to rent to straight people. They might not want to hire straight people, and that's their right too, because they own it. It's not like the courthouse hiring clerical staff with a duty to the taxation victims to get the best deal possible. It's not like a bus company with a special government contract to provide bus service, where it's the government actually doing the action, and it's not really a legitimate function of the government to provide bus service anyway. If one company is hogging all the taxi medallions and they won't hire queers to drive the taxis, that's a problem that can be solved by repealing the taxi medallion laws, so that anybody can just go out and buy a car and then go into business driving a taxi if they know how to drive it safely and everything. Well, that's one thing to stop the unprovoked violence and the government-imposed discrimination against queers. It's quite another to require legitimate people to serve the queers and to pretend to think that it's perfectly okay to be a homosexual. They went way too far. Now, the other part of the problem was the Clinton voters. You take a look at the vote totals in Florida, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, where Trump won. But you add the Johnson and Clinton votes together, they add up to more votes than Trump got. And that's 75 electoral votes in those four states. If the Clinton voters had voted for Johnson instead of wasting their votes on crooked Hillary, Johnson would have won those 75 electoral votes. Trump would not have gotten the magic number 270. Secondly, you take a look at all the states and the District of Columbia where Clinton won. If those Clinton voters had voted for Johnson instead of wasting their votes on crooked Hillary, Johnson would have won those electoral votes also and would have gotten more than 300 electoral votes. Johnson would be the president-elect right now instead of Trump. So see what happens when you waste your vote on crooked Hillary. And see what happens when the libertarians aren't allowed into the debates. Who knows how many more votes they would have gotten. They might have won a few states. Some of those four states, Florida, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, or they might have just won a handful of states just one state, Arizona maybe, and that would have prevented Trump from getting the majority in the Electoral College, throwing the race into the House of Representatives. So see what happens when you don't let the libertarians debate. You got Donald Trump. Now are you happy? See what happens when you waste your vote on crooked Hillary? And see what happens when you nominate crooked Hillary to the Democratic nomination instead of some other flaming liberal socialist like even Bernie Sanders. If it had been Trump against Sanders, who knows what would have happened. See, but no, you wasted your vote on crooked Hillary, and actions have consequences.